right in. The first article is about what is the continuous flow. Now, those of you that like Kate, who's on here, have done some of the certificate training with me, and Shannon, who's done a little bit, you'll know that the continuous flow is the most important component of the entire framework that we talk about. But I wanted to hear from you all what parts of this stood out to you, what questions you have, or what just kind of what resonated with you about this. Wants to kick it off. Shannon, did I see? Okay, how you doing?
Good, Jake. I'm going to just jump in and say I didn't get a chance to read the articles.
Yes, I know. I apologize. It got
No,
censored to you.
no worries. But I totally agree with you about continuous flow being the most important and sometimes pretty challenging to get kids into that continuous flow of interactions back and forth.
Right, and this is why it's so important. So one of the reasons counting the circles. Okay, good. Okay, and that's a good challenge to have. I'm glad you all are saying these things. So let's talk about that. How do we get the continuous flow, right? Because this is the reason it's so important is it's also the hardest thing to achieve, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's the way life goes, right? Some of the best things for us are the hardest things to do. Whether it be some work, whatever it might be. But in the article, it does go through some examples of how we're going to utilize a child's natural interest to challenge and expand, right? Because it's not just about following the child's lead. Because by definition, if we follow every child's lead and just follow their lead and we don't challenge or expand, then unfortunately, we're falling into kind of the same habits that the child falls into, which by definition are habits we're trying to improve upon and lead to growing. So they're not just repetitive or redundant or self-involved, but instead they're dynamic and communicative and creative and adaptive, right? So we have all of these things we hope to see in these exchanges. One of the most important principles of the co-regulated interaction of the continuous flow is the co-regulated piece, right? And this is the part I think people struggle with. Everybody's thinking about how do I challenge next? And what do I do next? How do I expand? That's relevant. But what we sometimes forget is how are we going to be counter-regulating in a co-regulated interaction in order to maintain that continuous flow? So you see, again, the lectures, or the lecture from previous weeks pertains to this. We talk about co-regulated interactions and counter-regulation. They're all part of the same process. So whether it be playing more sensorily with a child, where we're using gross motor and physical input, and Kate, I think you remember even in the beginning when we were doing some of the training at St. David's, that it wasn't everybody's inclination to utilize some of those opportunities for a robust co-regulated exchange. It was more about how do we get them moving, or how do we get that sensory stimulation into their bodies, right? And so if we start thinking every opportunity every day that child wants or needs something or is enjoying something is an opportunity for an expansive interaction. And one of the things I tell parents about this in our office is that, yes, sometimes in play, it's challenging. A child has a whole room to run around, right? And we can't keep up with them. So there's a break in the exchange, right? There's no longer engagement or interaction, or they get distracted. Well, some of that's about setting up the environment. We got to make changes, right? We get rid of the small toys, we get rid of the visual distractions, and we make sure the environment is a little bit more supportive of that child's nervous system. Because part of following the lead is also understanding the need. Okay. And I'm trying to find new ways of framing this, that knowing the child's nervous system, what they need, what they're sensitive to, right, and having them in spaces that support that is really part of following their lead as well, right? We're not controlling them. We're not directing them. We're just saying, riding a bike could be a way of doing it. What I've done with kids on bikes, for example, is I might be pushing the bike with them. It's not about teaching them to ride the bike. It's not about getting them to ride the bike. It's about using the bike as a fun tool that we're going to play a game or not. Maybe I'm pulling the bike fast. I'm pushing it fast. And now the child's looking at me with a big smile and I stop. Uh-oh. And they look at me with a bigger smile and that means go. And now we're getting into a co-regulated interaction. And then I keep expanding and I stop again or I slow down and they kick the pedals and that means go again. Right. And so now we're getting into a nice exchange around using the bike, but not about teaching them to ride. right? So, and sorry, I know you weren't. I'm sorry, I read your comment too quickly. Sorry, but it's a good example, anyways. I think. Um, but whether it could be a little Matchbox car, right? This happens all the time. Kids get a Matchbox car, they roll it back and forth. Well, the first thing is, why is the child rolling it back and forth? Okay, a lot of times kids who watch something roll back and forth are actually using their visual system to to process what's happening, but they're actually trying to deliberately stimulate it. And kids who like to watch things move actually almost always need to move more themselves. So we need to think about, why is this child wanting to watch something move across their visual field? And usually it's because they want to be moving themselves. And so when we do more gross motor activities that involve movement, they stop rolling things back and forth in front of their eyes. And so that's their vestibular system that they're seeking stimulation in. So watching tires spin, watching the fan, watching bubbles float or balloons float, right? Or watching balls roll down a slide. All of those are things that are stimulating the vestibular nerve in our ear canal, but through the visual system, because they actually, all these systems are intertwined. So if a child is doing that, we need to make sure that throughout the day they're getting more input. That's number one. But number two is whether we're riding a bike, or using an example of saying something's like riding a bike. The key ingredient with all this is making sure we're practicing this all the time. Okay, because a continuous flow of interaction, I want you to think about it like having a conversation, right? Or going out and having small talk. Okay, I'll be honest, I cringe at the idea of going to like dinner parties or networking events and having to engage in small talk. I'm not good at it. And when I get into a moment where I'm in a role with it, it's fun. But it's almost anxiety provoking for me, thinking, oh God, what am I gonna have to talk about? Right? Which sports teams, who's winning, who's losing, whatever it might be, the weather, the political stuff. So, but the reality is, the more we practice these things, the stronger we all get at them. And I've been through periods in my work where I've had to go to more events and I've had to practice small talk. And guess what? It gets easier the more I practice it. But so does that. Sorry, that's my puppy. Hey, buddy, no, not right now. The sorry, everybody. Yes, Doc. Yeah, is my giant puppy. He's a 150-pound, 1-year-old Mastiff. So he wants to play. But what the concept I was trying to get to is, if we practice this, not just in floor time sessions, I want you to practice a continuous expanded interaction all day long with your child. Okay, whether you're getting dressed in the morning, making a snack, putting shoes on, right? Even figuring out how to open the door to get outside to get in the car. Okay, how about getting a seatbelt? Everything can be done in an expanded interaction where we get into more co-regulated back and forth. It might only be 2 or 3 instead of 1 today. Tomorrow might be 5 back and forth exchanges. The next day might be 7 or 8 back and forth exchanges around putting socks on. But let's say it's time to put our socks on. Well, your child knows where socks go by this point. But what if you start putting them on their hands? What if you put on your hand? Uh-oh, I got your sock. They take it off yours. They point to their foot. They might even try to put it on themselves. But guess what? Now we're having a co-regulated interaction that can evolve, if it's long enough, into a continuous flow. That's how we need to be addressing this. So start with daily routines. Start with things like that they're familiar with, they know of the process for. Now, unfortunately, I've had a lot of professionals say, but isn't that going to confuse them? I said, no, they actually enjoy it more because now it's dynamic and fun. They laugh at mommy or dad when they put the sock on their head or on their hand, right? They're not confused and thinking now socks go on hands, right? Because we're not teaching them to reply in a more rigid and memorized way. We're teaching them to adapt and respond in a more creative manner, right? So now they're responding by taking it off, and maybe they put it on their hand as a game too, and it turns into a puppet. But now we have more interactions, right? That's the goal. All right, sorry, I missed a lot of the comments, everybody. It's hard counting. It is hard counting. But also I don't want you to count. So, my father would always say estimate. Okay. So when you've had an exchange with a child, whether it's 1 or 2 circles or 5 or 10 circles. Look at, and again, just as you're saying, you can drive yourself crazy trying to say, okay, was that a circle when they looked at me? Is it as much as a circle as when they reach out? Well, the truth is they're both circles. Okay. And so we're looking at the pattern. Now, we could probably break it down into such minutia. You're right. Like every exchange could have all these extra circles because there's all these subtleties. But look at the bigger picture stuff, right? What is your child trying to express? If they're not trying to express anything, take the little one. If they're trying to show you something and are more purposeful by moving their hand, by turning their head, looking at it with a big smile, right? Those are the communicative gestures, or certainly using words or sounds or phrases would qualify too. But look for the gestures. But again, it just depends where the child is. So a child who's operating within the first 3 milestones, right? They're working on just the basics. They're looking just at reciprocity. Sometimes all we do is get a little look out of the corner of the eye, right? That's a circle though. That's fine. You have to acknowledge that. If you don't acknowledge that, you're not going to get a bigger circle. But those are still circles. But just don't listen. We all overthink this. I did too. Try. I know I can see your face. Try not to, and it's hard not to. But try to just be in the moment. If the interaction is of a higher quality and it goes longer, then you've done a good job. Let's see some other comments here. Do you have an opinion about PDA through the DR lens? Why are these kids dysregulated all the time, despite of constant attempts to correct it? So I do have a very strong opinion about PDA. And I'm not talking about public displays of affection, right? We're talking about the defiance and the kind of rigidity that comes from many of these highly sensitive, high-functioning kids who have been diagnosed with PDA, which is now, I guess, on the autism spectrum as well. And it's pathological demand avoidance is what PDA stands for. I believe so. And what happens is, basically, we work with a lot of kids. My father used to put these children into a category called regulatory challenges or dysfunction. And not all kids with regulatory challenges had PDA, but a lot of children evidence the symptoms of PDA, meaning they tend to be very defiant, very rigid, and reactive when things don't go their way or change or someone makes a demand of them. I work, there's also another, I don't even know if it's a diagnosis they're using with ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, right, which has some similarities to PDA. I work with children with all of these diagnoses. And the number one thing we're trying to do is create better, more robust regulation. And so the key is, how do we help them be more adaptive and flexible? How do we help them feel more in control? And this is a very big oversimplification I'm about to tell you. When a child is pushing back on demands, right, it either means the demands are too tough and they don't fully understand them, or it means they're getting too many demands. Because usually when a child is feeling balanced and nurtured and supported, someone giving them an expectation, teaching them something, telling them to do something is well received. They have no problem responding to that. But usually it's the children who feel more disorganized with the world around them, right? The world is more overwhelming. It's more chaotic. They don't know how to socialize. They don't know how to have all the communication abilities. Well, now, sure, what's the easiest way for me to be in control? And again, I know this is an oversimplification, but I'm going to share it with you because it's going to make a lot of sense. What's the easiest way for me to be in control if I can't say, if I don't have all the skill sets to say, hey, I want to do that, can I do this, come play with me, doing all these wonderful, accessing all the wonderful things around me, I'm going to feel out of control. So what's the best way for me to feel in control? Well, to do things my way, to be rigid. But especially, what's the best time to be rigid? When someone else wants me to do something. Because now all I got to do is say is no, and I'm in control. Now, that's a massive oversimplification, right? There's so many more pieces that go into this, but think about that with so many of your kids and how it applies. Because what I want you to think about is, how is their balance on a daily basis between having opportunities to be in control and make decisions versus having to respond to other people's decisions. Okay. 99% of kids, especially if they're in a more traditional special environment, all they're doing is following someone else's instructions all day. They never have the opportunity to express themselves, advocate for themselves, share what they want to share, do what they want to do. And when they do, it's usually more self-involving, or they're just running around in a more fragmented way, right? It's not organized, it's not reciprocal, right? They're looking for feedback. They want to know they made a decision, now everybody else is following them, right? That's what floor time is. When you're doing a floor time session with your child, you're listening to them. And guess what? My father used to always say, give before you expect. So if you're going to listen to them, guess what they'll do to you later on? Not at the same time, maybe it's a month later, right? But who knows how long it takes. But if you start listening to them consistently, and I mean genuinely listening, not just by hearing, but doing too, they say something, you physically respond. They now know you're listening. Every single child we've done this with has shown improvements in their PDA symptoms. That is a guarantee. I can't say it will all go away. I can't say child still won't have reactive moments or rigid moments or defiant moments. But that's also part of possibly their personality. And I can almost guarantee you that one parent or both parents in the household have some of those personality traits too. Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And usually many kids, I'm not blaming parents at all, but many kids develop certain rigidities because people are dealing with them in a rigid way, right? If we're saying, no, it has to be my way, if it has to be my way, and we're trying to get the child to do things my way because I'm the adult and I know what they need, right? Well, guess what? I'm still using a very rigid approach because it's my way or your way. That's very binary, right? I'm saying my way is right, but I'm still being rigid. Just because I'm a smarter, more evolved adult doesn't mean I'm not being rigid. Saying my way is right. Okay. So we have to remember that because our goal is to help these children understand that they have a voice too and that their voice matters. And we respect them and they'll respect us. We listen to them and they'll listen to us. Give before you expect. Okay. It's the number one kind of mantra that I find is helpful for kids with the DDA diagnosis. This is particularly difficult, nonverbal. It's harder for me. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and when the child is nonverbal, dealing with some of these things, whether PDA or talking about the continuous flow, absolutely, it is more challenging, but you're working on more basic patterns, right? You're not worrying about all the higher level logic and creative ideation. You're just working on a back and forth exchange. It could be a smile for a smile, a look for a look, a movement for a movement, and that's going to be your bread and butter. So it only matters what you do, not what you say. Right, exactly. I mean, so we all as adults think that our words are, the kids are hanging on every word we say, right? And sometimes they do, and they reproduce ones they shouldn't have heard. But but more often than not, kids are actually learning from our behavior, right? And it's not just our behavior, but actually the most influential thing that a child perceives is our emotional state. Okay, so the affect we bring to it, right? I call them, we are a child's emotional model. And that's why when a child is escalating, when a child is getting frustrated, well, counter-regulation says we slow down. Well, the reason why that works is because now we're modeling a calm state, even in the face of a conflict. I'm saying, hey, I see you're screaming at me. You're right in my face like this. But I'm not going to react because I want to help you. I'm going to stay calm because even in a moment of conflict, I can stay calm. And guess what? You can too. Like that's the message we're trying to send. And if you can do that consistently, and especially if that child then isn't being exposed to someone else who's screaming at them, which can counter all of it, then they will learn that because they're getting your emotional feedback in exactly the way they. I know that parent me. I know you, Aya, and I know you're not that parent. You may feel that way sometimes, but I've also seen the other wonderful stuff that you do. All right, I want to be aware of time. I know we kind of talked about that a lot. Is there any other ideas or concepts about the continuous flow? Well, a few of the things that I want to really highlight from that article that I think are so important that that I think all of you agree with, especially since I know many of you in the lecture today, is that the continuous flow isn't just a goal for milestones. What this article is showing is that for the last 50 years, 60 years almost, theorists and researchers and therapists and doctors have been finding that these continuous co-regulated interactions in the first few years of life are the key to unlocking language, self-regulation, creativity, adaptability, and self-control, right? All of the things we talk about wanting for a child, right? But how much of each day do we focus on that with a child, right? How much time is a child getting to work on this, one of the most fundamental capacities that we need to strengthen and develop in order to be successful in life? Well, unfortunately, it's not enough for most kids because they're in a classroom either having to be compliant or follow rules, right? Or they're, unfortunately, we're busy and they're off on their own. And I'm not saying any of these things are not real barriers or real things that we have to deal with. But we as a community need to continue to think if these goals are significantly more important to work towards and achieve than sitting and knowing the alphabet or making sure we're on the right spot on a carpet for story time, right? If we know that these other goals are more important, we as a community need to establish, the expectation that these children are going to have access to working, whether it be in school or whether it be at home, because we now know that these goals actually lead to academic success. So you can still argue that they are helping a child access their academic environment if we work on it. It just may not be as straightforward and linear, right? But then again, what is with child development? All right.